What if for a few minutes, everything that keeps the world in place simply stopped working? This is not a story about an explosion or a war or something you could see coming on the horizon. What you are about to hear is a story about a brief, silent, and seemingly impossible event, but one with consequences that extend far beyond what anyone could imagine. This narrative is not about heroes, nor about clear villains. It is about humanity being confronted with something that challenges the most basic laws of reality, something that asks no permission and offers no immediate explanations. A story where every detail matters, and where the true impact does not occur during the event itself, but after everything appears to have returned to normal. As this story unfolds, you will realize that not all changes are visible, and that some questions are far more dangerous than answers. What happened lasted only a short time, but it left permanent marks. If you enjoy science fiction stories that challenge the mind, question certainty, and build tension gradually, stay until the end. The conclusion is unexpected. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel, because here we bring new stories every day, narratives designed to provoke, unsettle, and make you think. Follow the story to the end. You will see the world differently when it is over.
I was never able to say which second came first. The world gave no warning. There were no sirens, no tremors, none of those premonitions people swear they felt once tragedy becomes a headline. What happened was an ordinary moment, the kind that doesn't deserve memory, and then reality lost one of its oldest laws. Gravity failed. It did not fade slowly. It did not weaken in stages. It simply vanished, as if someone had switched off the planet's weight by mistake or out of curiosity. In a single motion, everything that was not anchored ceased to belong to the ground. People who had been walking became objects without destination. Children were torn from their parents' hands. Animals rose as if the street had turned into sky. Cups, phones, chairs, tools, chunks of concrete, dust, everything ascended in a silent, immediate chaos. The first accounts that reached me all shared one thing: the absence of sound at the beginning. An absolute, crushing silence, almost offensive, as if the air itself had been pulled away along with gravity. Then the noise arrived all at once, a roar made of screams, objects striking walls, shattering glass, engines out of control, alarms sounding far too late. But that initial silence stayed with nearly everyone, as if the world had held its breath before breaking apart. In the city's streets became rivers of floating bodies. People spun slowly, as if suspended in invisible water. Some tried to cling to poles, railings, door handles, anything that still belonged to the ground. Others were pulled upward by a force that was no force at all, only the absence of what kept them here. In tall buildings, windows became open mouths. Those near them were expelled outward with the violence of a sudden breath. Those inside elevators discovered a new kind of fall, a fall that went upward. Hospitals turned into impossible places. Stretchers drifted through the air. Equipment rotated like small planets. Sedated patients, tethered by tubes and wires, floated in clean, incomprehensible horror. While nurses tried to grab bodies and instruments at the same time, there were entire rooms where no one could place their feet on the floor. When someone struck their head against a corner, the blood did not fall, it formed bubbles that drifted slowly, as if the world were learning how to be something else. At airports, logic died first. Planes on the runway shed their weight and leapt upward like toys pushed by invisible hands. Others already in the air lost all sense of stability, climbing too fast, spinning, tilting in impossible ways. Inside them, passengers hung suspended, held only by seatbelts, while everything not secured became a projectile. Luggage carts, trays, even people without restraints floating and colliding as if inside a shaken box. Some flights vanished from radar, not in explosions, but in leaps, as if they had been pushed to an altitude that should not have been possible in that span of time at sea. The water did not know what to do without weight. Ships lost stability not by sinking, but by tilting and rotating as if resting on a surface that no longer existed. The ocean began to rise, forming suspended masses that looked like liquid mountains. In some regions, schools of fish and debris emerged along with the water, as if the seabed itself had been turned over. Workers on oil platforms described the absurdity of seeing waves frozen in mid-air for a few seconds before dissolving into mist and chaos. And then came what haunts me most to this day: the sky filled with things that should never have been there. They were not ships, nor lights, nor signals. They were fragments of everyday life, pieces of the world, torn from their places, floating above cities like inverted rain. Cars rising slowly, spinning with the calm of a nightmare. Roof tiles and metal signs forming spirals. Birds that did not flap their wings, only drifted, confused, as if they had forgotten what it meant to fly and what it meant to fall. Many people died during those 5 minutes, but the true number took time to emerge, because death did not arrive all at once. Some were thrown upward too quickly, struck tall structures, broke bones, lost consciousness. Others were sucked out of buildings, and when gravity returned, they fell from heights their bodies were never meant to reach. Some were caught in treetops, wires, balconies. Some were hurled far away and never found again. And some survived the impossible, only to discover that the impossible had left something inside them, because during those 5 minutes, millions of people reported the same thing, and it was not only the absence of weight, it was the presence of something. Many said that at the exact moment the world became too light, they felt a pressure inside their heads, as if an invisible hand had touched their thoughts. It was not pain, not dizziness. It was attention, directed focus, as if a vast consciousness had turned its face toward Earth and, for an instant, observed everything with cold curiosity. And in that instant came the sensation, an impression without words, a message without language, something not heard with the ears but understood by the entire body, an absolute certainty, as clear as it was terrifying. This had not been an accident. This had been a test. When the 5 minutes ended, gravity returned like punishment. Everything that had been in the air crashed down. Bodies fell onto cars, cars onto bodies, objects onto rooftops, rooftops onto streets. The world was crushed by its own return to normality. The sound that followed was not just impact. It was the sound of a planet trying to remember how to hold itself together in the hours that followed. The chaos seemed sufficient to explain everything. People wanted to blame a rare phenomenon, a cosmic failure, a cruel coincidence. But what began to terrify me was not what happened during those 5 minutes, it was what happened afterward. Survivors began to describe small changes, almost invisible ones. People who could no longer sleep without feeling the same pressure in their heads. Children waking and pointing at empty corners. Individuals who, amid the ruins, would suddenly stop, as if listening to a frequency the rest of the world could not hear. And always the same sensation returning in smaller doses, the impression that something was still watching, still assessing, still waiting. In the days that followed, as cities buried their dead and governments searched for explanations, another thing began to appear in the reports repeated too often to be ignored. In dreams, in lapses, in moments of near fainting, many people saw the same image, a dark red sky, heavy like old blood, and a place that did not exist on Earth, an impossible city. And that was when I understood that those 5 minutes had not been the main event, they had only been the door opening. In the days that followed, the world tried to convince itself that survival alone was a sufficient answer. Hospitals improvised, governments spoke of rare phenomena, scientists debated hypotheses like people trying to contain a fire with statistics, but no explanation managed to touch what had truly been broken. Because it was not only gravity that had failed, it was trust in the stability of reality itself. I watched the reports multiply, first as exceptions, then as a pattern. People who had floated longer during those 5 minutes began to show similar symptoms, even though they had never met. Persistent insomnia, a sensation of pressure behind the eyes, a growing difficulty in distinguishing exhaustion from alertness, as if the body had learned a new state and could no longer fully return to the old one. The dreams changed before any test could register something abnormal. They were not ordinary nightmares. They were continuous sequences, too organized to be the product of chance. The red sky always appeared first, heavy, unmoving, with no visible source of light. Then came the silence, a silence deeper than that of the 5 minutes, because it was not accompanied by panic. It was a functional silence, like that of a place that does not need sound to exist. The city came next, whole, as if it had always been there. There was no transition. One moment the dreamer was lying down, the next, walking through wide, overly smooth streets that did not reflect light. The structures obeyed no known architectural style. They were tall but not vertical, expansive yet without clear depth. From a distance, they seemed solid. Up close, they gave the impression of constant reorganization, as if every gaze demanded an adjustment. What disturbed me most was the uniformity of the accounts. People from different countries, cultures, and ages described the same routes, the same plazas, the same openings in the ground that led to lower levels of the city. There was no communication between them. Many were unaware of other reports when they began to dream, and yet the city was the same, not an approximation but the same city, repeated with unsettling precision. As the weeks passed, it became clear that access was not equal for everyone. Some were repelled the moment they touched the city's ground, waking with an abrupt sensation of rejection. Others managed to advance a few blocks before awakening, always at the same point. And there were those who stayed too long. These returned different dots. It was not something easily pointed out. There were no visible marks, no drastic behavioral changes at first, but something had shifted inside. These people spoke less, observed more. They carried a calm incompatible with recent trauma. Some spent hours staring at ordinary structures, bridges, buildings, roads, as if comparing them to something else. Something only they could see. Science began to record subtle anomalies, brain patterns emerging during sleep and persisting for seconds after waking, heart rhythms adjusting to uncommon frequencies, an involuntary synchronization among individuals who had remained suspended longer during the initial event. But none of this data explained the central sensation everyone described, the sensation of being observed. Not constantly, not oppressively. It was subtler and therefore more disturbing, like the impression that, at certain moments, specific thoughts became sharper, more organized, as if they were being aligned to an external pattern. There was no voice, no image, only the uncomfortable conviction that what arose in the mind was not entirely spontaneous. Meanwhile, the physical world began to respond. Measuring instruments registered micro-variations in gravity at random points across the planet, too small to produce visible effects, too large to ignore. In every one of these locations, there was something in common. Reports of dreams about the city appeared more frequently. It was as if space itself were becoming too thin, stretched from within. Collective fear no longer manifested as screaming or panic. It transformed individual. People began to avoid sleep. Others sought it obsessively, as if something there needed to be completed. There were cases of individuals who tried to stay awake for days, not out of fear, but out of expectation. Others surrendered to sleep with unsettling confidence, certain they would be accepted the next time. It was during this period that the first silent disappearances occurred. People who simply did not wake up. They did not die in any detectable way. Their bodies remained alive for hours, sometimes days, but without any sign of recoverable consciousness, as if something had been removed without leaving physical traces. These cases were quickly isolated, classified, removed from the public narrative. But the reports leaked. They always do, by cross-referencing data, dreams, and events. I began to perceive a pattern no one wanted to articulate aloud. The city was not a consequence of the 5 minutes without gravity, it was the continuation. Those 5 minutes had served to expose humanity to something it normally cannot perceive, an initial adjustment, a deliberate breaking of fundamental references. The city, in turn, seemed to exist to refine that contact, to translate the human mind into a format comprehensible to something greater. There were no signs of invasion in the traditional sense, no armies, no territorial occupation. What was unfolding was a process of alignment, a continuous test, distributed across the planet, using human consciousness itself as the medium. And the more reports I read, the clearer one uncomfortable conclusion became. Gravity had not failed by accident, it had been switched off, to see who would remain standing, even when the ground itself ceased to exist. As time passed, the world stopped reacting and began adapting. There was no clear moment of transition, only a slow slide into a new state, quieter and far more dangerous. People continued living, working, rebuilding cities and routines, but something essential had shifted. The certainty of belonging to the planet itself had been weakened. The dreams of the city became more selective. They no longer involved millions each night. There were fewer, always the same ones. A group that gradually shrank, as if a filter were being applied. Those who continued to access the city reported changes in the experience itself. The red sky remained, but it no longer felt strange. The architecture, once unsettling, began to seem functional, familiar. Even the sense of threat was replaced by something harder to confront: purpose. These individuals began to sleep more deeply. Their bodies entered states that medical exams could not properly classify: intense brain activity, but too organized to be chaotic, frequencies resembling accelerated learning patterns. It was as if sleep had ceased to be rest and had become training. I began to notice that these people no longer spoke of dreams. They spoke of displacement. They did not say they had seen the city. They said they had been there. The difference seemed subtle, but it carried enormous weight. The dream ceased to be metaphor. It became a place start in the waking world. They began to display small abilities that were impossible to ignore. They anticipated failures in complex systems, predicted structural collapses before any visible sign, made decisions with a cold, almost mathematical precision. They no longer made the same mistakes. When they did ERE, they corrected them far too quickly. These changes drew attention, and attempts at control became inevitable. Governments began mapping individuals recurrent in the reports. Voluntary observation programs emerged. Isolation protocols were proposed and quietly dismissed. None of it worked. There was no way to contain something that did not need to manifest physically. At this stage, disappearances ceased to be isolated incidents and began to follow an unsettling pattern. People who had reached deeper levels of the city simply did not return. Their bodies, when found, showed no organ failure. They remained stable, breathing, with regular heartbeats, but with no recoverable sign of consciousness. They were not dead. They were also not present. These cases came to be labeled irreversible states, a term created more to soften language than to explain anything. But when enough data was cross-referenced, regularity imposed itself. The longer someone remained functional within the city, the lower the probability of full return. The city was not killing, it was absorbing in the deepest accounts. The same central point always emerged. An area of the city where architecture ceased to be recognizable even as construction. Curved, pulsating surfaces that reacted to human proximity. A space where silence was not the absence of sound, but the absence of mental noise. Thoughts organized themselves there. Memories aligned. Emotions lost urgency. It was at this point that the sensation of being observed transformed into something more precise. There was no visible entity, no defined form. There was understanding, total, impersonal understanding, without judgment, as if each human mind were dismantled and reassembled with technical efficiency. The mistake was believing it was being evaluated as a threat. What was happening was integration. The city functioned as an environment of compatibility, an intermediate space where human minds were adjusted to operate under different rules. Gravity had been the first test because it was universal. The city came next because the mind required translation. Meanwhile, in the physical world, the signals grew clearer. Microgravitational variations began to synchronize. They no longer appeared randomly. They followed global patterns. Discrete, nearly imperceptible waves crossed the planet in regular cycles, always coinciding with peaks of brain activity among those connected to the city. It was as if the entire Earth were being used as a circuit. Then came what no one expected. People who had never dreamed of the city began to change. They did not see the red sky. They did not walk the impossible streets. Yet they exhibited similar alterations. Children born after the initial event learned too quickly. They developed spatial and logical abilities incompatible with their age. Adults who had never reported dreams began to display precise intuitions, rapid decision, a strange reduction of existential fear. The influence was spreading beyond direct access. The city was fulfilling its function and was beginning to become unnecessary. Some of the final reports from within it described gradual erasures, streets that ceased to exist, structures that lost definition. The red sky grew darker, more distant, like a system being shut down after completing its primary process. Those who could still enter described a new sensation, unprecedented throughout the entire experience. Farewell, not sadness, not urgency, simply completion. That was when I understood that the 5-minute event had not been the beginning of an invasion. It had been the beginning of a transition, and that humanity, without realizing it, was no longer merely being observed, but was beginning to become part of something far greater. When the city began to disappear, almost no one noticed at first. There was no final collective dream, no clear sense of closure. It simply became harder to reach. People who had once entered it with ease began to wake before ever touching the red ground. Others reported incomplete streets, interrupted structures, as if entire sections of that place were being shut down while they were still moving through them. The red sky was the first thing to change. It grew darker, thinner, like a background slowly being drained. Then came the breaks in continuity, paths that led nowhere, plazas that ended abruptly. The city was not collapsing. It was being carefully dismantled, like a tool that had fulfilled its purpose and no longer needed to remain active. In the waking world, the effects did not cease. On the contrary, they became permanent. The adjusted people continued living among the rest, now indistinguishable at first glance. They did not speak of the city. They did not speak of the red sky. They did not speak of what they had lost or gained. Yet it was impossible to ignore the difference in how they responded to the world. Crises no longer unsettled them as before. The idea of endings no longer produced the same fear. There was in them a quiet, almost technical acceptance, as if they already understood that certain human concepts had an expiration date. What was most disturbing was realizing that the process had not ended with them. Children born months after the initial event displayed patterns absent from any previous study, not merely heightened intelligence but extreme adaptability. They learned far too quickly how to ignore what was unnecessary. They showed an intuitive understanding of systems, relationships, and consequences. They did not ask why as often, but for what purpose, as if certain questions had been discarded before ever needing to be asked. The planet itself stabilized. The microgravitational variations ceased. Instruments once again registered normality. To any external observer, Earth had survived a strange event and moved on. Files were closed, reports classified. The 5-minute episode came to be treated as an unsolved mystery, an outlier in human history. But I knew that was a comforting lie. Nothing had returned to normal. It had merely become invisible. The city had never been meant to remain. It was a temporary interface, an environment created to make possible something that would otherwise be far too incompatible with the human mind. Once that function was complete, it was no longer needed. There was no victory. There was no defeat. There was adaptation. The invasion did not seize territory, did not destroy cities, did not impose direct control. It did something far more efficient. It adjusted humanity just enough so that a greater contact in the future would not be traumatic. A silent preparation, distributed over time, impossible to reverse without anyone realizing exactly when it began. Sometimes I still feel that faint pressure in my head, especially when everything is too quiet, not as a threat, not as a warning, but as a reminder, confirmation that the planet was observed, measured, and deemed viable, and that somewhere beyond human comprehension, something continues forward, knowing it no longer needs to look back because the true change has already been made.
And when everything ends, the world moves on, but not exactly in the same way. Because some changes don't need to be visible to be permanent. They make no noise, leave no clear marks. they simply integrate into reality and remain. Perhaps the most disturbing thought is not what happened, but the fact that a few minutes can be enough to change everything. Thank you for following this story to the end. If you enjoy science fiction that provokes, unsettles, and makes you think, subscribe to the channel and follow the next videos. Here, new stories are published every day. Some stories end, others continue, inside those who listen.